Welcome back to AVAIYA, Marni.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. I'm excited about this conversation today, as it's always nice to be able to bring the unconscious to our conscious and figure out what's going on. So why do you think we're influenced by the unconscious or what's outside of our current awareness?
Sure. Well, first of all, our unconscious mind is there to protect us. And as we know, sometimes we've gone through some painful things. We have some difficult memories, feelings, sometimes even a wish or something that isn't the way we want it to be. And so our unconscious mind protects us from a lot of that. And so sometimes we see those things as like unacceptable to really look at. So we kind of keep it hidden. Sometimes we're doing things unintentionally, but also there's sometimes things that are in there just because they started happening very early in our lives. And so it's part of our implicit memory, which is just that memory that we can't easily access or retrieve. And so sometimes it creates like an undercurrent that informs a lot of our choices, our decisions, what we do. And so we're just not aware of it. And so it can be dangerous, as you could imagine, if we're not so aware of those things.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. The idea of become aware of all those like unconscious, subconscious patterns and tendencies and all of that. So what are some of like the specific reasons you think some people are more susceptible to types of abuse like gaslighting and manipulation? Like, why is that?
Yeah, well, you probably won't be surprised to know that a lot of that is coming from your early experiences. You know, certainly if your primary caregivers did act that way or respond that way to you, or that's what they did in order to get you to be under their control or get you to behave in a certain way, they would use those tactics. And so sometimes people just think that that's the way it is, or it becomes very conflated with love. There are some things, though, that I think are, maybe a little bit harder for people to look at because we don't want to see ourselves. We want to think that we're a victim. Okay. And sometimes, absolutely, people are certainly victims of this. But I think it's also important for people to take a little bit of like a self-inventory to make sure that they're not also doing something to perpetuate some dynamic that they have with somebody else. And I think when it comes to emotional abuse or, narcissistic abuse or being gaslit, sometimes people are drawn to chaos or the drama of it, especially if they were used to a lot of chaos in their own histories or their childhoods. And so they look maybe peace and calm or having someone be direct and responsive to you. It just doesn't feel like second nature. Sometimes there's a secondary gain in that because we know if somebody takes on a victim mentality, they may be getting a lot of attention from other people or a lot of sympathy. So I know people want to be careful about that. And then we also kind of talked a little bit at the beginning here about unconscious mind, which creates a lot of defenses. And sometimes that's in overdrive. So some of the common ones that I see when it comes to situations where people are emotionally abused, sometimes there's some denial. So people just don't want to look at the reality of a situation. They just want to say to themselves, well, it's not really happening. So they get to circumvent some kind of responsibility or really feeling their own anxious feelings. Maybe it means that they have to make some serious changes in their life. So they might stay, stuck on that. It has them avoiding dealing with what's really going on. And then I see another one, which kind of comes a little more from Freud. Here we call it repetition compulsion. And that's essentially when you're doing something to almost recreate these kinds of circumstances, or you get, certainly put into these circumstances, but you're hoping that there's going to be a different outcome. So you might be reenacting something from your history or your childhood, but you're wanting to see if you could make the outcome different. So if I have someone treating me this way, and this is maybe the way a parent treated me, well, this time maybe I can do something to make it different. But of course, we know a lot of times that's an illusion, and then you end up perpetually in that sort of situation. Mm-hmm. So, and also we have people who think that if they just love somebody enough or care about them enough, that it's going to also change the situation, which of course ties into some of those other unconscious defense mechanisms. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of reasons I think that people can end up being drawn to, attracted to that situation. Again, and I certainly don't mean that as they want it, but they're drawn to it because maybe it feels comfortable or familiar. And so they end up in those types of circumstances with someone who, treats them that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love all your points there. And I really find it intriguing too, the conversation of the victim, because I totally relate to that. I can see that in myself. I can see, right, the spaces in my life where I've been addicted to or drawn to chaos and craziness and unhealthy relationships, just based on exactly like what you said. It might be something you were familiar with in childhood. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's how your parents acted. So you're like literally trying to recreate their relationship in a new partnership. And yeah, that like, if you were used to being victimized as a child in whatever way, right, that can bleed into our adult life. So I think that's so key to recognize those things in ourselves. And it's not always easy. I totally get that too.
Right. It isn't easy. And I always want people to gain the self-awareness and connect some dots, and not necessarily to blame. Because I know people say, well, I don't want to blame, my family or my parents. And I agree. I think it's not necessarily useful to do that. But I think the useful part are connecting the dots and recognizing that, and maybe holding up that mirror to kind of, just see, well, what might I be doing to possibly contribute to putting myself in the circumstances, or thinking and accepting that that's normal, because it certainly isn't normal. We all deserve respect and to be treated with kindness and consideration and all of that. And sometimes it comes from the inside out, even because if you grew up in those circumstances, we know that affects people's self-esteem. They think they're not good enough. They think they're deserving of it. And so they're operating from that place. And so when they're treated maybe in a very negative way or a bad way, sometimes they think, I deserve that. And absolutely nobody, absolutely no one deserves that. Mm-hmm. But if you have this negative view of yourself, you're going to sometimes also put yourself into situations that validate that narrative. Mm-hmm. So again, what work do you need to do? Sometimes from the inside out, sometimes making some difficult changes, sometimes looking at a part of yourself that isn't the easiest to look at. But all of that's going to be important if you're trying to get out of this kind of situation, and also make sure that you don't repeat it and get back in it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And so in your line of work and working with people who've had these unhealthy relationships, are you seeing people breaking free from these unconscious patterns and finding healthier relationships?
Yeah, I absolutely do all the time. And I think that's probably one of the more enjoyable aspects, of my work. So people can. I know that change is not easy. And I know you can sometimes feel like your wiring is a certain way, but we know from a lot of, science, neuroplasticity, which just means that your brain is pretty malleable. We can all learn new ways of handling the situation. And the more you're around people who treat you well, the more you're going to gravitate towards that. But also, some of these early unconscious experiences, they lie in the emotional part of your brain. So it's not always this cognitive part where we can think ourselves out of a situation. It's almost like you need your brain to update things. And by that, I mean that you need another emotional experience that kind of tells your brain, hey, this isn't going on anymore, or this doesn't have to happen, or you don't have to feel this way. So we know that we might have a negative thought about ourselves, and we just tell ourselves, well, if I just thought I'm great, why can't I then get myself into situations where I'm treated better? You need an experience that tells you that this, this doesn't have to keep happening. So with that, sometimes you need something like, you've probably heard of a lot of these practices in therapy, like EMDR or hypnosis, or something that's more mind-body oriented, because this stuff can lie deep. And so we need to reach that stuff. So we need to reach what's running the show from behind the scenes in our unconscious mind.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say absolutely, people can certainly break free from these things.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of the process is knowing what's going on and what's happening and how it happens. And then you move on to solutions and what it's going to take for you personally to break free from some of these circumstances.